Hey everyone, Heero here, and today we're gonna look at Evanescia, our adorable pink fox who relies on getting insane amounts of certified banger to deal massive damage. I'll be discussing her kit, builds, lightcones, and possible teams. Just as a quick disclaimer though, the footage and information shown is from the creator experience server, so some things could still change when her banner drops. Let's first start with Ava's basics, which just deals damage, nothing really too special. I just wanted to showcase the animation since you'll probably never actually use it. As for her skill, it's your fairly standard blast attack that also happens to regen 10 punchline points every time you use it. And it's pretty much the only ability you want to use during her turns to maximize her energy and certified banger gains. Now for her ult, aside from looking really cool, it's also a pretty powerful bounce AoE and is her main damage source, with it dealing 160 physical damage to all enemies, after which it deals 5 bounces targeting random enemies, with each bounce dealing 120% of her attack. It's also very important to mention that she has a max energy cost of 480 despite her ult only costing 240 to use, which allows her to use her ult back to back as long as you have enough energy. Now thanks to the second part of her A2 passive, her ult also gains more bounces depending on the number of enemies present, going from 6 bounces with 3 or more enemies all the way to 9 bounces with 1 enemy. And if you're curious, here's the total damage multipliers depending on the number of enemies. So technically you do lose out on some damage the less enemies there are, though in return, her ult does become more potent at dealing with single target scenarios. But as for her elation skill, it's another AoE, but more importantly, it also gives her 5 points of certified banger upon use. Oh, and it also looks pretty damn cool, and you'll end up spamming it a lot in her best teams or if you have her E1. Now we're gonna talk about her talent, which has a pretty damn long description because it's pretty much the bread and butter of her kit. First of all, Ava gains elation equal to 20% of her crit damage. Now aside from minor traces and supports, this is pretty much the main way she gets elation, and there is no cap to this, so get as much crit damage as you can. Moving on, when she gains energy, she gains an equal amount of certified banger, and when she gains certified banger, she gains an equal amount of energy. Just note, there is no cap to the amount of energy she can gain from this, but the amount of certified banger you gain per instance of energy regeneration is capped at 100. And yes, any energy source counts for this, whether it may be the refund from her abilities, enemies hitting her, stage buffs, or teammates like Wo giving her energy. And it is affected by energy regen buffs like an ER rope. It's also worth to mention that her A6 and a part of her A2 passive also helps a ton with her certified banger stacking, with her A2 allowing her to convert 50% of any certified banger gained by any elation unit into her own as long as said unit has an elation skill with a participant ID lower than hers, which is pretty much every elation unit aside from Wolfie. And it is worth to mention that she does steal this certified banger. So for example, if the EMC gains 10 certified banger, Evanescia steals 50% of it, so they only both get 5 stacks. As for her A6, it's pretty simple. Whenever any of her allies' certified banger expires, it allows her to convert 50% of it onto her own. Now these 3 abilities combined is what allows her to stack up to absurdly high certified banger counts and regen energy super fast to spam ults, especially when paired with units like the EMC, Yao Guang, and Wo. But going back to her talent, it allows her to accumulate up to 240 energy in a separate meter whenever she regens energy. And once you accumulate 100% of the meter, it gets consumed, so Master Fox launches an AoE follow-up attack while regenning 10 energy for Ava. Her talent also has the usual clause that allows elation units to deal elation damage when they have certified banger. However, there are a few things to note about this. First, according to her talent's description, the elation damage from her Master Fox's follow-up attack actually has attack scaling. Second, her elation multipliers are actually pretty low compared to other elation units, simply to compensate for the fact that she gains tons of certified banger. And finally, when her ult deals elation damage, the amount of certified banger it takes into account depends on the amount Evanescia currently has. If she has less certified banger than her energy cost, which is 480, her ult will always take into account 480 certified banger. But if she has more certified banger than 480, it will use that instead. Now the damage difference between 480 to 1000 certified banger is not actually that big, and is only a 0.7 difference in damage multipliers or about a 1.16 times difference in overall damage, which is mainly due to a lot of diminishing returns as seen with the graph. So while yes, getting to high amounts of certified banger is neat for min-maxing damage, especially for her other abilities with lower multipliers, it's not always a must to get a super high certified banger count before ulting, and it's much more important to time your ults appropriately to better deal with the current situation. As for other miscellaneous stuff, her A2 passive also gives her 30% crit rate, which puts her at 53.7 crit rate when counting the ones she gets from her base stats and minor traces. While her A4 passive allows Master Fox's follow-up attacks to inflict a 12% damage vulnerability debuff, which of course is pretty neat for more damage, and it stacks well with the Mushroom Lightcone. And finally, for her technique, it attacks all enemies around her in the overworld, but in battle, it deals a physical AoE to all enemies while giving her 20 points of certified banger. But for her talent priority, level up her talent first since that's where her elation scaling is, after which level up her elation skill, then her ult and regular skill, and finally you can just ignore basics since you'll pretty much never use it anyway.
With her kit out of the way, we can talk about her Eidolons.
Her E1 increases her all-type res spend by 20%, and after you proc Master Fox's follow-up attack, it triggers Evanescia's elation skill. This is on top of allowing her elation skills to generate 10 additional certified bangers for a total of 15. But with how fast Evanescia gains energy, it causes her to spam her elation skills a ton, and overall, this Eidolon is just an insane damage increase for her. While her E2 gives her 36% crit damage, which translates to 7.2 elation. And it also increases the amount of certified banger her traces give her from her teammates, with her A2 getting a 50% increase, while her A6 gets a 100% increase to the value gain. So for example, with her A2, when an ally gains 20 certified banger, without her E2 she gains 10, but with her E2 she gains 15 instead. While for her A6, when an ally loses 420 certified banger, without her E2, she only gains 210 back, but with her E2, she gets the full 420. As for her E4, it's just a 15% def ignore for all of her damage, which of course is pretty neat. And finally, for her E6, it increases her certified banger duration by 1 turn for a total of 3 turns, which is a great quality of life change for more consistent damage. It also Mary makes her elation damage by 100%, and for every 100 points of certified banger she has up to 1000 points, it Mary makes her elation damage by an additional 2% for a max of a 35% Mary Make buff. Which is insane since this is a 1.5 to a 1.35 times total damage increase since it is a buff giving a unique multiplier. And finally, it also allows her first ult in battle to refund 120 energy, but after that, it only gives us energy refund after every 4 ults, which of course helps her spam even more ults.
With her Eidolons out of the way, let's talk about Lightcones.
Ava's pretty signature gives her a 60% crit damage buff just by equipping it, which of course translates to 12 elation. Aside from this, it also gives 10% ER, but for every 10 points of max energy the equipper has above 120, up to 360 points of extra max energy, she gains 0.3% more ER. And yes, Ava easily maxes this out, allowing her to get a 20.8% energy regen buff. And finally, when she uses an elation skill, it inflicts a 15% damage vulnerability for 2 turns on all enemies, which of course stacks neatly with the 15% already in her kit, allowing for a 30% total damage vulnerability. Overall, it's a pretty great Lightcone that not only has great damage amping potential, but it also allows for even better certified banger and energy generation for more ults and damage. As for alternatives, her best 4-star is the BP Cone for a big elation buff and more crit rate to make her easier to build. But it only really becomes way better than the Mushroom if it has refinements, which of course can get pretty expensive. So with that being said, her best free-to-play Lightcone is the Big Mushroom for its big elation buff and its stackable damage vulnerability that pairs well with other copies of it on the team and her own damage vulnerability debuff. And for those curious, the Mushroom is generally better than the Event Cone, cause it has a bigger elation buff even when considering the amount of elation Ava can get from the Event Cone's crit damage bonus. And the Mushroom's damage vulnerability debuff is just that much more valuable since it's a less saturated bonus compared to crit damage due to Evanescia already building a lot of it. She also has another option, which is Sparxie's signature. It gives a 48 crit damage buff, which translates to 9.6 elation, but more importantly, she can actually stack up its passive to get its full 20% elation def-ignore, which stacks up nicely with the Magical Girl set. However, the main caveat being it takes a really long time to do so, especially when running base speed Eva, since she needs to use 4 skills. So it's best used during long fights, and it's worth to mention that she can't get its 20% elation buff.
But with her Lightcones out of the way, let's look at possible relics.
For relics, her best set is the ever-glorious Magical Girl, which gives her bonus crit damage while giving up to a 20% def-ignore if you manage to stack up to 50 punchlines, which you can easily do throughout the battle. Overall, it simply enables her damage by a ton, and it gets way better if you also have other sources of defense reduction in the team. However, if you still don't have good pieces, you can use a combo of any crit set as a good alternative. Preferably, you have at least one crit damage set to give her more elation. As for planar sets, the best set is Punk Lord since it is the only elation planar currently available. With it giving an 8% elation buff, but it also gives a crit damage buff that in turn gives Eva even more elation. Overall, it's just a set that gives her all the stats she wants to enable her damage massively. However, since her best teams do contain other elation units, you can also use Izumo. It helps you a ton with balancing her crit ratio, with it putting her at 65.7% crit rate. And its attack buff is not completely useless since it does help with the non-elation portion of her damage, but of course, Punk Lord is still most definitely better just because of its elation buff.
With her possible sets out of the way, let's talk about stats.
Now she has an okay base attack of 737 and a good base speed of 104, while her traces give her 18% elation, 19% crit rate, and 5 speed, which puts her at 109 speed and 53.7% crit rate without substats, so make sure to consider all of that when building. For main stats, a crit damage chest is preferred since she already gets a lot of crit rate from her kit, while for the rope, energy is the best option mainly for maximizing energy and certified banger generation, and it's really the only option you should use. As for the orb, now despite her damage mostly being elation, she actually still deals decent non-elation damage on top of it due to her ability's good non-elation multipliers. So a physical or attack orb is great for min-maxing her damage. But the difference between the two isn't too big anyway, so just pick whichever one has the best substats. However, again, just note, since her damage is still mostly elation, the damage increase from the two isn't too crazy. So alternatively, you can just go for more bulk with HP or defense, which could be useful for sustainless teams. As for the boots, again attack is great for min-maxing the damage of her non-elation abilities, while speed puts her directly at 134 without any substats. Now both setups have things you have to consider, but I'll get to that when talking about her speed goals. But speaking of which, for minimum stat goals, for crit rate, try to get around 70% crit rate out of battle, which should put her at 100% when considering her A2, giving her 30% in battle. But if you have Yao Guang's signature, go for 60% instead, and of course, be careful of overcapping on crit rate. As for crit damage, since her trace converts it into elation, I recommend just getting as much as you can. But a minimum to go for is around 200 without her signature and 260 with her signature out of battle. But of course, I urge you to get more if your build allows for it. Now finally, for speed, you can go for 134 or base speed, and there are a lot of things to consider when picking which one to use, but mainly it boils down to the content and team you're running. You can leave her at base speed and just have her teammates build her ult and certified banger for her, since she's not reliant on her turns to deal damage, since a big chunk of it comes from her ults, elation skill, and Mr. Fox. Plus, a faster Eva can result in an iffy certified banger uptime, causing you to have less consistent damage for her non-ult abilities since they don't have the 480 minimum CB guarantee. But it's worth to mention that this higher certified banger and buff uptime is the main draw to attack boots and base speed. Cause Eva's damage is still mostly elation, attack boots will only lead to a marginal damage increase. However, it is important to note that base speed will cause you to lose out on more Eva skills. which also deal a ton of damage, but more importantly, you could also lose out on potential ults since each use of her skill regens a ton of energy and certified banger. So with that being said, you can give her 134 speed with speed boots alone. And the more speed does affect Aha's speed, which will generally allow you to get your Aha's turns faster, especially if you happen to be missing a core elation unit like Yao Guang. But in general, and as a TLDR, speed boots and 134 speed becomes better if it allows you to get extra ults or Aha turns in the content you're running, and if those combined with the extra damage from more skills mattered enough to make a difference in your run. It also gets even better for longer fights since you'll definitely get more ults and Aha turns compared to attack boots then. And it's a great way to compensate for the less energy and certified banger generation if you happen to be missing Yao Guang and her best alternatives. While base speed and attack boots are better if min-maxing her non-elation damage, and if having higher certified banger and buff uptime matters more for faster and smoother clears. Plus, it's usually preferred when running shorter content with her best teams.
But with her build out of the way, let's move on to possible teammates.
Evanescia is a DPS unit that prefers to be ran with other elation units like Yao Guang or the EMC to help regenerate as much energy and certified banger as possible to spam high-powered ults. But she also works with other energy supports like Wo and generic buffers like Sparkle. But with that being said, her current best team is one with Yao Guang, the EMC, and Wo. And this team generates so much energy and certified banger for Eva that she can consistently spam high-powered ults while still keeping a consistently high certified banger total. Now for the sustain, Wo is the best, mainly since her energy gives so much benefits for Eva. But if you don't have her, don't wanna use her, or didn't pick her from the selector, pretty much any sustain can work. Dan Heng being great for general sustaining, Fu Xuan being great for crit buffs, Hyacinth great for her S1's damage vulnerability, and more. Now, you can also replace the EMC with Sparksy for her higher personal damage, greater punchline building, and huge 80% crit damage buff if the Trailblazer is on another team like the Remembrance one. However, there are a few caveats to this combo. First, you will lose out on the EMC's better buffs and on-command elation skills for Eva. Second, Sparksy doesn't have as much access to skill points in this comp compared to a Wolfie comp or a team dedicated to her. And finally, Eva ends up stealing some of Sparksy's certified banger, so most of her damage will come from her elation skills instead. But despite all of that, it is still a pretty solid comp, especially for AoE-centric content like Pure Fiction. Simply due to Sparksy's high damage and punchline building, allowing you to be less reliant on Eva for damage, so it turns more into a duo DPS team. And if you do have some vertical investment on Sparksy like her E1 and S1, she does become quite a competitive option over the EMC in terms of support utility, even for other content. But before that, the EMC should still be better for enabling Eva's damage. Now, if you don't have Yao Guang, I highly recommend that you don't replace her with Sparksy since the EMC simply isn't capable of buffing both her and Eva at the same time, and there are better alternatives for Yao Guang. First of all, there's the usual generic damage ampers like Ruanmei and Tribi for Respens, DDD and their E1s, Cypher for damage vulnerability, and Silver Wolf for defense shreds. But the best alternative would be Sparkle, who has pretty good buffs for elation units and is generally easier to get to 161 speed, so you can still take advantage of action advances without ruining certified banger uptime too much, and it could also potentially allow for more Eva ults. She can also help by spamming DDD to help get your teammates' ults faster, which in turn enables Eva further. Plus, her attack buff alongside Eva running attack boots with base speed is great for min-maxing her non-elation damage. However, despite that, she is still good for buffing Eva's overall damage, so she is probably the best alternative to Yao Guang. Now, Sunday can work too for his crit buffs and huge energy, but he has a lot of caveats. First of all, you can't run a -1 speed setup since it throws all certified banger uptime down the drain due to Eva taking too many turns. This does get solved if you run a 161 speed Sunday and a base speed Eva, But getting Sunday to 161 is honestly painful, so I don't recommend going for it unless you have godlike substat luck. Second, his damage buff doesn't buff her elation damage, which is her main damage source. Third, his crit damage buff does not affect Ava's elation passive since they're both stat conversions. However, it is still good for buffing her damage in general. And finally, his buffs are generally worse for buffing elation units compared to Sparkle, simply due to the fact that Sparkle has more buffs that can affect elation damage. So despite the amount of certified banger and energy he can generate for Ava, in most circumstances I would recommend just using Sparkle. And the only time I would recommend using Sunday is if you don't have her or if you really need the energy he gives in the content you're running, and that's if you can get them to 161 speed. Now, there is one more surprising and unorthodox setup you can run, which is a sustainless team with Cyrene and 2 other supports of your choice, with the RMC and Yao Guang being preferred. And the main reason you want to do this is Cyrene's instant ult activation she gives the entire team after her first ult, which gives you both of Evanescia's ults. And with all the buffs from a sustainless team, it lets you quickly burst down bosses. However, there are 2 things to note. First, this team is only recommended for quick sustainless runs because after her first ult, Cyrene, aside from her true damage buff, quite literally becomes useless and does nothing else for the team, and will most likely die if the fight takes too long. Second, Elysia's ult takes a while since she is not in a flame chaser team, so there is a good chance Sakura and your units die before she gets it. So it is highly recommended that you run this team with her E2 or the RMC just so you get her ult faster. It's also worth mentioning that you can still use this setup with an E0 Cyrene together with the EMC. But again, the issue is survivability, however it does enable way more damage for Ava than the RMC, so I decided to showcase it at the end. It's also worth to mention that other sustainless non-Cyrene teams can work as well with any of the supports I mentioned earlier, with my personal recommendation and favorite being a Wealth sustainless team since it is by far the easiest one to run due to his slows. Personally, I'm gonna be pulling for Ava since I've been a fan of Yae since Honkai Impact. But the real question is, when is Callan coming, Hoyo? The Pink Fox needs her. Unless of course she's the one in Luocha's coffin, which would ironically be pretty funny. But anyway, make sure to tell me what you think about her in the comments below, and don't forget to hit me with a like and a sub. Now onto the showcase, I hope you enjoy.
You